Good morning, guys. Today we're going to be doing some more shading, but this time we are going to be using our shading to make a shape, two-dimensional shape, appear three-dimensional like a form, right? So we're just going to need some paper, a pencil, and something that we could trace around to create a circle. So I just have a cup here. Anything you guys have, a cap, a glass, anything to draw a decent size circle on your paper. So we're going to start by tracing that, and then we can put that to the side. All right, so the first thing we got to think about is the direction of the light source that's going to be interacting with the sphere. So I'm going to have mine coming down from the left, right? So that's going to be important on where the lighter areas are, where the darker areas are, and also the direction of our shadow. So once we have that figured out, now we're going to use that same lightest value that we were working with yesterday, where we started with those squares, and we're going to fill in the entire surface of the circle with that lightest value, except we're going to leave a small area, kind of like an oval shape right up here, that's not all the way up against the edge of the circle, but a little bit past, and we're going to leave that as a highlight, so the lightest area where the light is reflecting off of the surface. Right? So you guys could start working on this while I'm working on mine if you'd like. It's going to take a little bit of time. But remember, we want to have that value and our shading nice and light. I'm using the pencil on its side, just like how we practiced yesterday. We're not leaving any lines behind. Now with this one, ideally, you do want to stay a little bit neater and try and stay inside the lines as much as possible. Obviously, if you go outside the lines, we're working with pencil, so we could erase it. But try to work on staying as neat as you can while we're shading. So I've got my lightest value, and I've got my circle filled in with that lightest value. Right? And again, I left this area without any graphite on it. So now what we want to do is opposite the side of where the arrow is. So back here, this is going to be our darkest area. So we're going to start shading this darker and making it lighter and lighter as it's getting towards that highlight area. So very similar to that second exercise we did yesterday, where we filled in the rectangle and then one side was darker and we gradually faded it. That's what we're going to be doing here, but we don't want to have our shading go directly left to right. We want this to look like a curved surface, like a sphere. So as you're shading, make sure that you're shading that curving as it's coming up towards your highlight area. And remember, if you're having a difficult time with your fade, you could use your finger to help blend that a little bit, so it's going to have a nicer transition to it. Okay, this is going to take some time. If you need to fast forward the video a little bit, that's fine. One of the tips I want to give you guys, though, is make sure that your shading is coming up the sides a little bit. Don't have it just be a straight line across. Have it come up each side just a bit, again, opposite of where your arrow is. And another thing you could do to make it easier is kind of turn your paper or your sketchbook, whatever you're working on, so that you have a nice, easy angle to work with. Okay? And I'm going to have that start to fade up the side as well. And remember, I want to try and maintain that curve as much as possible as I'm working with my shading. So as I'm getting closer to the highlight, I'm going to use less and less pressure so that obviously the value is a little bit lighter. Okay, so I'm gradually building up the surface of the paper. You could tell that I didn't get the right value on the first try, so it's going to take a little bit of time. You have to keep working on getting that value right. Okay, I am going to continue to darken some areas over here and work on that fade a little bit, but I want to get you guys started on this next part, and then I'll show you a photo once I get completely finished. All right, so we talked about the light source is coming down this direction, so obviously the shadow is going to be a little bit longer here. So there is going to be an oval shape that we're going to draw in. There we're going to see a little bit on the left-hand side, but it's going to be a lot longer on the right. So a really skinny oval shape is what we're going to draw in. All right? It's going to be nice and dark underneath. But one thing you do want to do is leave a thin white line between the bottom of your sphere and the shadow, because we don't want these two really dark values to blend together. So we're going to leave a very thin white line. It's actually something that we notice in real life. It's called reflected light. So a little bit of light is going to reflect off of the surface of whatever the sphere would be sitting on top of. So that's what that white line is going to represent, and it just makes everything a little bit nicer looking as well. So we're going to go nice and dark while it's underneath the sphere right here. And once we reach about this area, the shadow is still going to be fairly dark, because obviously it's a shadow, but we do want to have it start to fade gradually. So once we reach here, I like to just fill this in really lightly. And then again, come back and have that start to fade. Right? When you get finished up, clean up your edges a little bit. And like I said, I'm going to do a little bit more work on my shading. Right? All right, have fun when you're finished. Take a photograph and post that on Google Classroom, please. All right, have fun.